So it took Bernie Sanders a while to get to the proper place on Israel. Now, by the way, what is the proper place on Israel? At the bare minimum, not another penny for that government as they committed genocide in Gaza. That's the bare minimum, guys. I mean, I've walked through my whole spiel with you before. I would cut off the money. I would cut off the weapons. I would allow through at the UN a condemnation of what's going on. And then also I would sanction them, and I would try to actually bring them up on war crimes charges and get Netanyahu's ass in jail, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, all of the genocidal maniacs, all of the people who are calling the shots and making the decisions on the ground that led to the killing of 14,000 children and 33,000 civilians overall. That would be my approach. My approach are all of those things. Now, in our current Congress and Senate, nobody's advocating for all of that. The best you get is, hey, we got to cut off the money we got to cut off the money and the weapons, not a penny, because what they're doing is unacceptable. That's the best you got, which is sort of pathetic and inexcusable, right? I mean, Russia just murked Navalny, and Biden's out there the same day or a day later saying, we're going to do new sanctions on them. Well, Israel killed 14,000 children. Is that not worthy of sanctions? Like, what are we talking about here? So Bernie was very resistant early on in the wake of October 7th to really realize what Israel was doing in response to that, to realize the scale and the scope of the atrocities and the barbarity and the purposeful killing of colossal numbers of civilians. So recently he started singing a different tune, being much more anti-Israel with his commentary. But this is a fascinating moment in this interview here. So Ash Sarkar got an interview with Bernie for Novara Media, I believe, and asked Bernie a very simple question, like, is what's happening a genocide? Very simple, straightforward question. Let's see how he handled it.
In your view, is what Israel is doing in Gaza a genocide?
In my view, it is absolutely disgraceful, horrible, and I'm doing, as a United States Senator, everything I can to end it. And where I'm sitting is, and I don't know how many people know this, every year the United States provides about $3.5 billion in military aid to Israel. On top of that, there is a bill. I was supposed to be here early. Couldn't come because a bill came up for, not just all for Israel, $95 billion, including $14 billion for Israel. And I have led the opposition to that. I do not want to see the United States complicit in what Netanyahu and his right-wing lunatic friends are doing right now to the Palestinian people. So my job right now is to support what the United Nations is trying to do, have a humanitarian ceasefire, see if we can get the humanitarian aid immediately in there, and work out, as complex and difficult as it is, some type of long-term solution to what's going on there.
But do you buy the South African case at the International Court of Justice that what Israel is doing in Gaza constitutes genocide or genocidal acts?
I think, look, we can argue about definitions. It is horrible. Right now, 29,000 people have been killed, and some 70,000 have been injured. Some 65% of the housing units have been destroyed or damaged. And I am worried right now, and I almost wonder why I'm in the UK and not back in the US dealing with this stuff, is that we have hundreds of thousands of children are facing starvation. That's what I have to work on right now.
But if one agrees that it is a genocide, it means that other states have a legal right and duty to prevent genocidal acts being carried out.
But see, we can talk about that, but what does that mean in real terms? Right now, what I am trying to do is what I think is probably maybe, and I can do it because I'm a senator, you can't. Right now, maybe, if we tell Mr. Netanyahu that he's not getting a check for $10 billion more to continue his aggressive action, he and his right-wing friends may decide it is not a good idea to continue to do that. So that's where I am coming from.
In addition to stopping the billions of dollars in military aid that Israel gets from the United States every year, would you back calls for a cultural, sporting, and economic boycott of Israel?
I am nervous about economic boycotts of any country, to be honest with you. But right now, what people want to do, they can do what they want to do. But right now, again, my job as a United States Senator, and I'm kind of leading that effort in the Senate, is to tell Netanyahu that he is not going to get any more US aid.
Did you feel nervous about the boycott movement against apartheid South Africa? Was that a concern you had at the time?
What I thought that as an apartheid state at that point, it was important to put pressure. But people can do as they want, and that's all.
In other words, as an apartheid state, it made sense to put economic pressure on South Africa, but he hesitates to say the same thing for Israel, even though it's an apartheid state, and even though they're in the midst of a genocide.
British citizens and American citizens can go and fight in the IDF when, as you say, there are such profound humanitarian concerns in Gaza.
Well, I think if British and American people want to do that, I suppose they have the right to do it. It's not something that I've really thought a whole lot about.
Do you think they should have the right?
Look, I think what the Israeli government doing now is horrible, and I'm not quite sure why people would want to be, part of that effort.
So, look, he said a lot of things there that were good, saying it's horrible, it's terrible, we got to cut off the money, etc. But he refuses to call it a genocide. Now, does that matter? Yes, it matters, because functionally, when you get down to the specifics of the genocide case at the ICJ, if you're not answering in the affirmative that you think it's genocide based on the evidence, well, then you're on the side of Israel's leaders getting away with it. Look, here's the definition. The deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group. I honestly don't know how any honest person could look at what's happening on the ground now and disagree that it's a genocide. I don't understand that. I don't get it. And what you're seeing here from Bernie is the limits of institutional progressive thought in DC. The limits of institutional progressive thought. As I just described for you, Navalny was just killed by Russia, and the same day or a day after, we're going to do a whole new sanctions package. But Israel has killed 14,000 children, 33,000 civilians in a short time frame. They've bombed hospitals and schools and mosques and churches and marketplaces and UN buildings and Doctors Without Borders, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. And the best we get from the best senator is we got to cut off the money to try to force them to change their mind about the genocide that they're doing. Do you think that's enough? You think that's strong enough? Isn't the obvious answer, and try to imagine if one of our official state enemies was doing what Israel's doing right now, isn't the much more obviously correct answer, like I already laid out? You cut off the money, you cut off the weapons, you sanction them, you bring them up on war crimes charges, and you try to actually get them arrested. Aren't those things necessary? And honestly, if it was any other country, I don't agree with this, by the way. This shouldn't be the case. But if this was an official enemy state to the U.S., we would be talking about doing regime change. We would be talking about sending SEAL Team 6 in there and putting a bullet between Netanyahu's eyes. That's how far we would go if it was an official enemy country. Now, again, I don't agree with that. I don't believe in that. I think regime change is bad and wrong. But certainly when it comes to somebody like Netanyahu, sorry, the dog's kicking the camera again. Certainly when it comes to somebody like Netanyahu, certainly when it comes to this current Israeli government, you have to do way more than just cut off the money and the weapons. You have to sanction them. You have to bring them up on war crimes charges. The idea of economically fighting back, BDS, that is the only possible and correct way to do this, where you still maintain the moral high ground and your own morality and your own ethics, and you get it to stop and you bring about justice. And he's very skittish on the idea of economic boycotts. He's clearly against something like sanctions. The furthest he'll go is cut off the money and cut off the weapons. Again, I don't want to be too harsh because that's better than 98% of the other people in DC, but it goes to show you the limits of progressive thought when you're talking about these giant American institutions. That's the most you're going to get when it comes to one of our allies. No matter how egregious, no matter how over the top, no matter how extreme, doesn't matter how many literal Nazi-like comments are made from top Israeli government officials, doesn't matter how many times they're saying, we're doing the Gaza Nakba, there are no innocent civilians, I'm going to destroy this Palestinian civilian store, I'm going to kill some children and take a happy picture on their bicycles. I'm going to kill some disabled Palestinians and take a picture holding their canes. Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the most you get is, I don't really know if it's a genocide, and the best I'll do is, let's try to change their mind by cutting off the money, but that's it. It's just pathetic, man. It's just pathetic. Because again, I'll ask you guys this question. If he can't call it a genocide now, well, then what would Israel have to do for him to call it a genocide? Would they have to literally nuke Gaza? Is that what would actually have to happen? And in that scenario, would he still hesitate to call it a genocide? Like, I'm asking this question in all sincerity. What would have to be done for him to call it a genocide? And more importantly, the logical consequence of him not saying it's a genocide is what? He's effectively siding with Israel in the ICJ case. If he doesn't believe it's a genocide, he's saying no. They should be found not guilty. And I'm sure he would say, I disagree with them. What they're doing is bad. It's horrific. It's brutal, etc. But clearly he views it as more of like we need to change their mind. Like, like it's a choice. Same thing with, this was the limits of progressive thought during the Iraq War too. It was always like, the people who were more correct were always like, this is a strategic blunder. It's like, a blunder is when you trip and fall on your ass and everybody laughs at you. This is a war crime. This is illegal, unconstitutional, a war of aggression based on lies. It's torture. It's something that should land your ass in The Hague. And nobody would say that. The best you'd get is, this is a mistake. And his commentary here reminds me of that. It's always the kid gloves for the U.S. and our allies. They always get the like, well, we need to change course and try to make them change course. But don't say it's a genocide. Don't try to bring them up on war crimes charges. Don't try to have actual accountability for 33,000 dead Palestinians and counting. And they're starving them as we speak, by the way. So, not good, Bernie. Not good. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.